Okay, today I'm going to preach a message. If you're taking notes, and I don't always do this, sometimes I forget, so you got to remind me. But the title of the message is Moving into the Neighborhood, because sometimes people kind of freak out if they don't have the message title to begin. And so moving into the neighborhood. But before we do that, I'm going to start with this idea of vicinity, because we're starting a brand new teaching series today. And today it's called Vicinity NYC, but today for the next 3 weeks, we're going to be in this series talking about how we as individuals, how we as a church can engage our vicinity. And the significance of engaging in our vicinity, but more importantly, not just engaging with our vicinity, but engaging the who in our vicinity. And when we talk about this word vicinity, when we talk about this kind of context, I was just kind of to level set and get everyone on the same page, just use the dictionary definition for this word. And the dictionary defines a vicinity as simply this: a surrounding area or district, the quality of being near or proximity. So I think we all understand that and know that, but sometimes it's easy to forget the fact that a vicinity or something about a vicinity has to be within proximity. It has to be near. It has to be something in the surrounding area to us or for us. And the reason why vicinity matters is because when you think about your life, the things and the people that have the most impact or the most significance in your life are those that are within your vicinity. Those that are within close proximity, those that are within your immediate surroundings. Okay, I'll give you an example of this. Like, everyone is making a fuss about the L train, right? And the L train shut down. Okay, this thing is shutting down. People are up in arms because they can't get from one place to the other. And I kind of get it, but the truth is I really don't care because the L train is not in my vicinity. It doesn't affect me. It's not in my surrounding. It's not in my area of proximity. In fact, all the L train shutting down means for me is that I won't go to Williamsburg once a summer. Like, that's about it. That's all it means. In fact, I'd actually just take the ferry now because it's actually more convenient and nicer than being stuck underground. But for the people who live in Williamsburg, or for the people who depend on that L train to get cross town, like, it affects them. It impacts them because it's in their proximity. Now, if it wasn't the L train, but if it was the Q train or the 4-5 or the 6, I'd be livid. Like, I would be flipping out. I would be upset, just like all those people over there. Why? Because it's within my proximity, because it's within my vicinity, because it's in my surrounding area. And now it's kind of like a similar, or kind of like a cheesy thing to use, but now think about it in a more significant way. In fact, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you 15 seconds, and it's going to be awkward for 15 seconds because I'm not going to say anything. I wore a watch so I can time it. But for 15 seconds, I want you to think about someone who's had a significant impact in your life and why or how they've impacted you. 15 seconds, and it can be anyone from any stage of life. It can be someone that's in your life currently. It could be someone who's no longer with us. It could be someone from your childhood. It could be someone that lives somewhere else. It doesn't matter who they are, where they're from, how they're connected to you. 15 seconds to think about someone who has impacted your life and how they've impacted or why they've impacted you. So here you go. Ready? Go. Think about what they mean to you. Think about why that mattered. 15 seconds. It doesn't take long to identify someone. It doesn't take long to identify why or how they made a difference. And while I don't know or don't have the time to ask each and every person who they are or where they are or why they mattered or why they impacted you, chances are it was someone who was within your vicinity. A parent, a mom, a dad, a teacher, a brother, a sister, a friend, a spouse. And that person has impacted you because they were in proximity to you or with you. In fact, a stranger, someone who lives far away, someone who's distant from you, very rarely actually makes a significant difference in your life because they're not within your vicinity, because they're not within proximity. But when you think of that person and you think about the time that they've invested, all the things they sacrificed, the investment that they made into your life, the times they built you up, and the times they stood by your side when everyone else left, the times that they said, hey, you know what, you're better than this, or there's more in you than this, and don't worry, this is a setback, it's going to set you up for something greater. Those people, those individuals, those situations all happened or took place because someone was engaged in their vicinity, and you happened to be a part of that vicinity. And it's not just our personal lives. For as much as we talk about, the people that impact us, or as much as we talk about what's happening within our own vicinity, the whole city, New York City, operates like this. It operates within this idea of vicinities or distinct vicinities. And everything in New York City kind of like functions around this idea of vicinity. I mean, maybe more than, or definitely more than any city I've ever lived in, but maybe more than any city I've ever been to. New York City is a city defined by its vicinities. It's defined by where you live. It's defined by who you live with. It's defined by where you work. It's defined by who you work with. It's defined by your commute. It's defined by who's on that commute with you. It's defined by where you have to engage. It's defined by your social life and the parameters and the constructs around the people you hang out with and the people you enjoy life with. It's defined, of course, by your faith community and the church that you're a part of or the group of people that you're connected to. All these things happen within distinct vicinities, sometimes good and sometimes bad. But the city lives and operates in this way, and the surrounding area and the surrounding places within these vicinities, the surroundings within each of these vicinities is not only impacts you, but it could define your experience. I remember in 2013 when my wife and I moved to New York. I was born here, moved away, and then moved back as an adult. And so it was me, Krista, and at the time, G, our daughter, was 18 months old. And so we were moving back to New York, and we knew we were going to live in Manhattan, and so we knew we needed to be someplace, or we knew we needed to be, we wanted to be near Central Park because we needed some sort of escape, because anyone that lives in like Midtown is crazy, anyone that lives downtown they don't have kids, and then everyone uptown, it's like they seem a little bit more sane. And so we were like, well, let's move, we want to be near the park. And at the time, we thought, well, if there's a couple options around the park, but let's go to the west side. Because the west side has, bigger sidewalks. We got a stroller, so that's going to be nice. The west side has elevators up and down to the subway. Like, that's convenient. That's helpful. The west side, it seems a little bit like more peaceful and just kind of a little bit more tranquil. And so I'm not even going to lie. You guys think I'm lying to you. I looked at 18 apartments on the west side and didn't get a single one. And it just like never worked out. And so my broker, like he was a Christian even, and he was like, hey man, I don't know what else I can do for you. And he was like a good guy. He was trying, but he's like, look, if you're stuck on this neighborhood, I've got to dip. I've got to move on because there's nothing that's working out. And so he's like, well, why don't we go over to the east side? And I was like, oh, the east side. This is 2013. There's no such thing as a Q train. There's no such thing as, elevators to the subway. The east side, yes, it's near the park, but the east side is the most densely populated part of all of New York City. In fact, the east side is the most densely populated neighborhood in all of the U.S. Like, I can't deal with that madness. Then we got this baby, we're on a stroller, the sidewalks are tiny, they're cramped. The 4, 5, 6 line, there's too many people who ride that thing. Like, I don't want to be on the east side, but we had no other choice. So we found a great apartment in a walk-up building on 2nd Avenue between 84th and 85th, just outside where they're doing all the construction in the middle of the night. And so we hated it. And to top it off, our first week we moved in, and we live on the 2nd floor of this walk-up that's like mice infested. And, find that out later. They don't tell you that when you sign the lease. And so we moved in. Our first week we're in this walk-up, and all we hear all morning long is boom, boom. And it's like, what is this? Like pounding starting from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. Like pounding on a counter, like literally a hammer to a counter. Because we lived above a deli. And for whatever reason, 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. was the best time to tenderize the meat. And that pounding, the first week, I'm like, I'm gonna go nuts. I'm gonna kill myself. Like, we signed a 1-year commitment to this place, and this vicinity is terrible. This vicinity is awful. Like, God, why did you do this to us? It was just crazy, but it was in that moment that we realized, that your vicinity has a profound impact on how you live. It has a profound impact on your life. And in any given moment in this city, you can be surrounded by people around you, surrounded by people above you, and literally surrounded by people beneath you. Hundreds and thousands of people, all within your vicinity. I mean, New York City is completely unique in that way. There are few other cities in our country and in the world that operate or have that kind of dynamic where in your vicinity at any given moment, no matter what time of day it is, no matter what time of night it is, no matter where you are in this city, there are hundreds and thousands of people within your vicinity. But it's not just the impact that our vicinity has on us. You see, because I'm kind of a stubborn person, And I'm a little bit like kind of bullheaded, and so I don't like the fact that something can impact me, but I can't impact it back. And there's kind of like this like shriek of vengeance in me, and I'm like, well, you're going to do that to me, then this is what I'm going to do back. And I'm going to do that to my vicinity, and I want to kind of figure out like, what do I know? It's not just how my vicinity impacts me, but what kind of impact could I, or what kind of impact could we have on our vicinity? What kind of difference could we project or impose in our surroundings, in our places of work, in our places of living? Because when I look at Jesus' life, Jesus wasn't just the type of person that allowed things to happen to him. Jesus was the type of person that it would actually go out and affect and impact his vicinity and his surroundings and his place of living and his place of dwelling and those places of engagement. Because Jesus wasn't just satisfied with allowing to say, or kind of sitting back and just saying, well, this is the vicinity I'm in, this is the space I'm in, and so it's just going to have an impact on me, the way I live, who I am, who I become, and I'm not going to have any opportunity to impact this space. That wasn't the way of Jesus. In fact, all of Jesus' ministry was based on him engaging his vicinity. Jesus was about people and places. Think about it this way, okay? For some of us in this room, you know the names of more Bible cities than you do the name of cities in the state of New York. Right? Like Capernaum, Jerusalem, Jericho, Bethany. You have these places, Nazareth. You can like kind of list off 5 or 6. But like if you go to name 5 or 6 cities in the state of New York, you're like, do the 5 boroughs count? Can I even name the 5 boroughs? It's like, is Staten Island a borough? Because no one ever goes there, but I guess it's a borough. Is that a city? And you're like, you top out right outside of this, like outside of those things. We struggle to know. But the reason why we know those cities and the reason why we know those places that Jesus engaged in was because the authors and the people connected to Jesus realized that Jesus engaging in the neighborhood mattered, that Jesus engaging in these vicinities made a difference. In fact, what this should teach us is that yes, your vicinity has a profound impact on your life, but your life should have a profound impact on your vicinity. It's not just about what happens to you, but it's about what God wants to do through you to impact those around you. That it's not just your vicinity impacting you, but that your life actually has the opportunity and the ability to have a profound impact on the vicinity, on your surroundings, on those within proximity of you. Physical, emotional, and relational. I love the way Eugene Peterson writes this in John 1:14, writes this about Jesus in the Message paraphrase. And this is what he said about Jesus. The Word, speaking of Jesus, became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. We saw the glory with our own eyes, the one-of-a-kind glory, like Father, like Son. And this is what he says, generous inside and out, true from start to finish. I mean, to me, this is such a perfect translation, a perfect rendering of what Jesus did. Because for most of Jesus' adult life, he lived in a village of Capernaum. And in this village of Capernaum, while we may think of it as a city or we may think of it as a town, the fact is Capernaum wasn't very big, it wasn't very influential, it wasn't very significant in the time or in the space that Jesus lived. At its peak, Capernaum had about 1,500 residents, had about 1,500 people. Its geographic footprint, like the actual space, the landmass that Capernaum occupies, was literally not bigger than one New York City block. So in reality, while you may think of it as a city, while you may think of it as a town, the truth is Capernaum was really more like a neighborhood or a small part of a neighborhood. It wasn't very big, it wasn't very significant, it wasn't very overwhelming. It was a small fishing town on the northern rim of the Sea of Galilee, and in that space and in that vicinity is where Jesus stepped in, quite literally moving into the neighborhood. He wasn't born there. He wasn't from there. He moved there as an adult, like many of us did with this city that we reside in. We weren't born here, we're not from here, with the exception of a few of us, but we've moved here for some reason or another, and we've moved into some sort of neighborhood. But when Jesus moved into this neighborhood, when Jesus stepped into Capernaum, when Jesus engaged in this vicinity, everything changed. Everything quite literally changed. When Jesus moved into the neighborhood, the outcast became familiar. The outcast were welcomed in. When Jesus moved into the neighborhood, the sick were healed. People who were kind of considered, untouchable or unrecognizable or don't engage with them because you might catch what they have, were healed and welcomed back into the fold. When Jesus moved into the neighborhood, the blind received their sight. When Jesus moved into the neighborhood, lame people were able to walk. When Jesus moved into the neighborhood, dead people were brought back to life. When Jesus moved into the neighborhood, a lot of different things happened. But when Jesus moved into the neighborhood, there was the crazy, there was the unbelievable, there was this miraculous, but there was also the simple. Because when Jesus moved into the neighborhood, strangers became friends. when Jesus moved into the neighborhood, neighbors became family. When Jesus moved into the neighborhood, dinners became parties. When Jesus moved into the neighborhood, enemies became brothers. And when Jesus moved into the neighborhood, communities were transformed. This was the way of Jesus. This is what he intended to do. This is what happened when Jesus engaged his vicinity, and Jesus took this neighborhood thing quite literally and quite seriously. And the thing about this, it wasn't just that Jesus moved into the neighborhood, but it was the way that he did it. I mean, look back at that last part of that verse. It says, generous inside and out, true from start to finish. You see, the reason why neighborhoods and communities and vicinities were transformed was because of the way that Jesus engaged in his vicinity. It wasn't just what he did, it was the way that he did it. And there was this way about Jesus that involved generosity, that involved truth, and it allowed him to engage and connect in a deep and in a meaningful and a transformative way. And as we step out as a church, as we step out as individuals into the vicinities that God has placed us in, it's not just going to require that we step into our vicinity or that we engage our vicinity, but that we engage it in a certain way, more specifically the way of Jesus. Because if Meta Church is ever going to become a church that changes the city and changes the world, it's going to start when we engage in our vicinities. Yeah. This is where change happens, because this is how Jesus himself changed the world. It wasn't this big global mission. It was small. It was sizable. It was in a recognized neighborhood. And it started with this. So this is what I want to touch on as we begin this series. And I want to begin first with this idea of generous. Now, normally when we talk about generous or generosity, we're talking about it in the context of money, right? We're talking about it in something tangible like dollars and bills and gifts and something of that sort. But in this context, it's bigger than that. It's more than that. This is about attitude. This is about time. This is about dedication. This is about spirit. This is about actions and behaviors. This is about assumptions. You see, Jesus was generous. You see, generous speaks to our actions, because to be generous requires that you act on it. You can't just say someone's generous in spirit but stingy in action. Yeah. There's no such thing. So to be generous requires action. It has to be demonstrable. It has to be something that people see and receive and experience and feel. And in every circumstance, Jesus, both in his heart and in his actions, was choosing to be generous, was choosing to offer generosity. That's what he says, generous from start to finish. Generous from inside and out. It was both what was inside of him and then how that showed itself and revealed itself in the areas surrounding him. And the fact is, let's be honest, this isn't normal to us. I'm not on my own. I don't desire to be generous. Maybe I should be put it in this way. I don't desire to be generous to people that I don't think deserve my generosity, or people that aren't outside of my immediate vicinity that I've known, that I've created, that I've constructed. Yeah. But when Jesus stepped into the scene, when Jesus moved into the neighborhood, generous and generosity were something that he showed to any and everyone. Right. It was his actions. It was the way he lived. It was the way he engaged. It didn't matter if they were rich or poor. It didn't matter if they were male or female. It didn't matter what background they came from, what their illness was. It didn't matter if they were sick, healthy. None of that mattered. What mattered was that they received the best he had to offer, that he could show them and reveal to them that his heart and his actions were generous. And when it comes to us, that we already have an example. It's why we talk about this a lot at Meta. What's the most generous thing you can do, and what's the most generous thing you can believe? If you can answer those two questions in any and every scenario, you will find yourself living more and more like Jesus. But it wasn't just generosity. It was truth, right? He talked about being true. True from start to finish. Now, true means real. It means genuine. It means authentic. True is about being through and through from start to finish with integrity, with character, with the same person, the same mission, the same heartbeat. So while generous speaks to actions, truth speaks to motives. Because our agendas often politicized or get in the way of how we act and how we behave. You see, Jesus wasn't looking for self-recognition. He wasn't trying to build a following. He wasn't trying to amass a bunch of Instagram followers or a bunch of Facebook likes or a bunch of retweets, because that wasn't Jesus' business. In fact, he was content having 12 people to hang out with. He wasn't worried about, do I have the hundreds or the thousands? Do I have the perception where people look and say, wow, I like that guy? He wasn't interested in that. He was interested in being true to who God called him to be and true to the mission that he was supposed to fulfill. And it didn't matter what people thought. It didn't matter who followed. It didn't matter who rejected. It didn't matter who accepted it. Jesus said, this is the truth, and this is the way I'm supposed to move forward in that. And I'm going to do this. My motives are not going to be dependent on whether someone receives it. It's not going to be dependent upon whether or not someone reflects it or projects it onto someone else. It's going to be because this is who I am. And I think one of the things that I realize is that too many people, too many individuals, too many organizations, so let's be specific, too many churches have an agenda. And they're not operating with true motives in the sense that they do something with some sort of expectation of a return. Oh, let's get involved in this project. Let's get involved in serving in this area. Let's get involved in helping this person with the belief or with the assumption that if we do this, they're going to pay me back in some way. Or with the belief or with the assumption that we as a church, if we do this, then that means they'll come back to our church. And then eventually they'll come to our church and they'll get involved and they'll start serving or they'll start giving or they'll start doing this, and this for us. And that's not true. That's not authentic. It's dishonest. It's immoral. It's wrong. It's sinful. But Jesus didn't live that way. Jesus didn't model that in his life. Jesus was true from start to finish. And I think one of the things that kind of put this like real practical terms for those of us who have been in church, for those of us who grew up following Jesus, is that there's a lot of us Christians who think, well, if the church doesn't tell me to do this, then I won't do it. If the church doesn't set up a way for me to connect with my neighborhood, if the church doesn't set up a way for me to serve people in need, if the church doesn't provide an outlet for me to do something as an organization, well then, I'm free from having to do that. I'm alleviated from that burden, and that's dishonest, and that's not true. Because Jesus didn't wait on a church. Jesus created it. Jesus enacted it. Jesus lived it. And I think we as a community have to get beyond this point of saying, well, someone has to tell me what to do in order for me to live like Jesus. Because we don't. I mean, it's helpful, it's encouraging, it can be beneficial. But when it comes to the way of Jesus, look, I'm outlining it for you right now. Generous and true. Your actions and your motives. Well, what if I do something nice and they don't say thank you? Okay. Has someone ever done something nice for you and you've never said thank you? We were all children, so the answer is yes. Well, what if I do this and it doesn't turn out the way I expected or whatever? Well, what was your motive in doing that? Was it so that you can be more like Jesus, or was it so that you can feel better about yourself because you're insecure and worried? These are the things, these are the questions we have to wrestle with. And the fact is, these two things, generous and true, are what's needed to change a vicinity. It's what's needed to impact the neighborhood. And it's exactly what Jesus modeled for us so that we can say, well, I don't know what to do, or I don't know how to go about this, but you know what I can do is I can look at Jesus and I can see how he lived. I can see how he worked. I can see how he connected with people. I can see how he engaged his vicinity. And while it might not spell everything out for me in black and white, crystal clear detail, it gives me enough of a direction that I can move forward with in my faith and actually see something or experience something of meaning and significance. And the fact is that what Jesus did 2,000 years ago is the very thing that can be done today to make an impact in our city. Because here's a news flash for you, PSA. Jesus is no longer here. At least not in the physical sense, not in his physical body. Instead, he's empowered us through his Holy Spirit to be his representatives, to be his ambassadors, to be the ones who show the neighborhood who Jesus is by the way we live in our actions and the motives and why we live that way. That's good. Which begs this question. What moved into the neighborhood with you? What moved into the neighborhood with you? When you moved into this neighborhood, whether it was last week or whether it was 3 decades ago, whether it was when you were born into this thing, what moved in with you? Because we all brought something into this neighborhood. The question isn't what did we bring something, it's what did we bring? And did what we bring represent or reflect the heart of who Jesus is? Who in your vicinity has been shaped or changed by your life, by your motives, by your actions? You know, as a kid, I grew up watching this show called Mr. Rogers. How many of you here know Mr. Rogers? Okay, good. I'm not that old. Great. I mean, he went on for forever, but there's a lot of millennials in here. And so Mr. Rogers, he had this show, right? And it was all about like how you live your life, and it was an incredible run for I think almost 60 years or 50 years. And the show started with this song. And you probably remember the song. I'm not going to sing it for you because I'm terrible at that. But I'm just going to read you the lyrics. In fact, it's 4 stanzas. I'm just going to read you the first and closing stanza of the song. This is how the song said. It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? The last stanza says, so let's make the most of this beautiful day. Since we're together, we might as well say, would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Won't you please? Won't you please? Please, won't you be my neighbor? We live in a city surrounded by millions of people who are looking for someone, anyone, to move into their neighborhood, to move into their vicinity and just say, hey, I'm going to come and I'm going to bring the best that Jesus has to offer. No agenda, no motive other than to be the best picture of Jesus that you will ever see in your life. And that is the best way that I can be a neighbor to you. Millions of people looking for that, realizing that there's desperation, that there's hopelessness of feeling like, am I alone? Does anyone see? Does anyone even know that I'm here? And all it takes is us being as simple as a Mr. Rogers song and answering the question, yes, I'll be their neighbor. Yes, I'll be generous inside and out. Yes, I'll be true from start to finish. Yes, I'll be your neighbor. That's what I want to bring when I moved into the neighborhood. And Meta, my call, my purpose, my hope, my ambition, my mission is that I lead a church of people who say that's what I want to bring when God brought me into this neighborhood.